No one expected Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett to put Elon Musk on blast in the middle of a nationally watched hearing. The room froze as she turned to the billionaire, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Mr. Musk, your behavior shows a troubling disregard for the rule of law," she said, steady and direct. What happened next? No one saw it coming. For a moment, it seemed like the world's richest man might finally face consequences for his bold defiance. But what happened next completely stunned everyone in the room. Musk didn't flinch. He didn't get defensive. Instead, he simply opened a folder in front of him, and the entire atmosphere in the room changed. The legal battle that many thought would break him was about to take a shocking turn. It all started with a federal case, FCC versus X Corporation. The government accused Elon's company of violating certain rules around communication and online regulation. Most people assumed it would be a simple case, a quick decision, maybe a fine, and then everything would return to normal. But Elon doesn't do normal. Instead of bringing a high-profile legal team, he walked in by himself. No army of attorneys. Just a folder in his hand and that iconic black t-shirt. The courtroom was packed with journalists. Government officials filled the benches, confident they had the upper hand. Some chuckled to themselves. This looked like arrogance or foolishness. Then, Justice Amy Coney Barrett addressed him. Her tone was sharp and clear. "Mr. Musk, you seem to think the Supreme Court is a place for stunts. But this isn't a stage. This is where we interpret law." The room went still. Everyone waited to see how Musk would react. He didn't flinch. Calmly, he replied, "With all due respect, Justice Barrett, I agree completely. And that's exactly why I'm here." There was a brief silence in the courtroom, the kind that always seems to stretch on longer than it actually does. Everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for the next move. Then Justice Barrett's voice sliced through the stillness, her tone sharper now, more insistent. "In your brief, you claim that the FCC is secretly pushing for political censorship under the guise of regulation. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Musk. Do you have any proof to back that up?" Justice Barrett asked, her words cutting through the tense air. Elon Musk didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, almost too composed for the gravity of the moment. He reached into the folder that lay before him and, with deliberate care, slid a thick document onto the table. The rustling of paper was the only sound that broke the stillness as the entire courtroom turned their attention to the papers. "This," Musk said, pointing at the document with a steady hand, "is a transcript of an internal meeting at the FCC. In this meeting, government officials openly discuss using technical compliance as a way to pressure platforms into removing certain types of speech, specifically speech they don't agree with politically." As Musk spoke, his words echoed throughout the room, each one hitting harder than the last. The courtroom had grown quiet, save for the sound of the pages being turned. It was clear that this was not the expected rebuttal. Immediately, the government lawyer sprang to action, his voice rising in protest. "Objection, Your Honor. That document is not part of the official case record, and it hasn't been submitted through proper channels," the Solicitor General argued, trying to shut it down before it gained any traction. But before the Solicitor General could finish, Justice Barrett raised a hand with authority, silencing him instantly. The sharpness in her voice was unmistakable. "We'll decide what's relevant, Counselor," Justice Barrett said, her voice firm, shutting down any objections. She looked at Musk again, her gaze piercing, as if trying to read between the lines of his every word. "So, you're saying the government is using regulations as a backdoor means of silencing political voices?" Justice Barrett asked, her voice almost skeptical but not dismissive. Elon Musk didn't hesitate. His voice was even, but there was a certain gravity to it that made his words hang in the air. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And what's more, they didn't even try to hide it. These officials were blunt about their intentions in these meetings." Musk replied, leaning forward slightly, as if emphasizing the weight of his words. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. What had begun as a straightforward legal dispute had now escalated into something far more significant. The accusation that the government was using regulatory power as a tool for political censorship suddenly made the case seem less about Musk and more about something much bigger: the potential overreach of government power and its ability to manipulate free speech. The courtroom, once full of skeptical murmurs, was now eerily quiet. The justices exchanged looks, some seemingly stunned by the audacity of the claim, others sitting up straighter as they processed what Musk had just implied. It wasn't just about tech regulations anymore. It was about the very foundations of free speech, and Musk had just made it clear that the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. What had started as a legal battle to regulate private companies had now taken on the weight of a constitutional debate. The case had suddenly become a public spectacle, a legal showdown with the potential to reshape the boundaries of government power in the digital age. As the hearing progressed, Elon Musk continued his relentless presentation of documents, one after another, each more damning than the last. The stack seemed endless: emails, meeting notes, internal memos. With every page he flipped, he laid bare how the FCC had quietly, and at times directly, pressured tech platforms to remove, downrank, or outright silence certain posts, accounts, and even search results. But the most striking part wasn't just the breadth of the documents. It was the content. These weren't just random removals of hate speech or dangerous content. No, Musk's documents revealed that the FCC was going after much more than that, targeting political opinions, medical perspectives, journalist writings, and even the voices of elected officials. The scope of what was being silenced seemed to touch every corner of the digital landscape. Justice Barrett, who had initially approached the case with skepticism, appeared to be shifting in her seat. She had been quiet for a moment, digesting the flood of evidence Musk was laying out. Then, her voice, once sharp and confident, now carried a hint of genuine concern. "If what you're saying is true, Mr. Musk, this court may be looking at a serious constitutional violation," she said, her tone carrying the weight of the moment. The seriousness of her words hung in the air, and it was clear she understood the magnitude of the situation. The Solicitor General, visibly flustered, jumped into the fray, trying to downplay the growing implications. These were suggestions, not mandates, he argued, scrambling to regain control of the narrative. The FCC was simply encouraging platforms to promote safe and responsible content. There was no coercion involved. His voice lacked the same confidence as before, and it was clear he was grasping at straws. But Musk wasn't having it. His eyes locked onto the Solicitor General, unyielding. "You don't encourage with the threat of license revocation," Musk shot back, his voice calm but forceful. "That's not a suggestion. That's coercion." His words struck like a hammer, and the room seemed to take a collective breath. There was no denying the force behind his argument. For the first time, even the liberal justices who had been more reserved up until now were visibly reacting. Justice Sotomayor, known for her sharp questioning, leaned forward in her seat, clearly eager for more details. Justice Kagan, always meticulous in her deliberations, had her eyes fixed on the documents, scanning them for anything that might refute Musk's claim. Even Justice Thomas, who typically remained quiet during proceedings, was paying attention. He nodded slightly, a gesture that, though small, was significant. It was as if he was signaling that Musk had sparked his interest, that this was a line of inquiry worth exploring further. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted. What had started as a case about regulatory compliance had now transformed into a constitutional battle. Musk was no longer just defending his company. He was drawing the court's attention to something far bigger: the potential abuse of governmental power to control speech. The justices, once focused on the technicalities of the case, were now deeply engaged in the fundamental questions Musk had raised. As the presentation of evidence continued, the tension in the room mounted. The questions grew more pointed, more intense, and it was clear that the case was no longer just about what had happened with Musk's platform. It was about the very fabric of free speech and the role of government in regulating it. With each passing moment, the stakes were rising higher. As the session neared its end, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The justices were beginning to gather their papers, preparing to leave for the day. But then, Chief Justice Roberts turned his attention to Elon Musk. The weight of his question hung heavily in the air as all eyes turned to him. Mr. Musk, do you believe your company is the only one being targeted? Chief Justice Roberts asked, his voice calm, yet carrying the unmistakable gravity of the moment. Elon paused for a brief moment, his eyes scanning the courtroom, as if weighing the magnitude of his response. Then, with a quiet confidence, he spoke, his words slicing through the air like a revelation. No, sir. I believe every major platform is under pressure. The only difference is, I said no. A stunned silence filled the room. Gasps echoed from the bench and the audience, and whispers rippled through the gallery. Even the justices appeared momentarily taken aback by Musk's bold declaration. Heads turned and eyes widened in disbelief. Elon Musk wasn't merely defending himself. He was making a sweeping accusation that sent shockwaves throughout the courtroom. He wasn't just arguing against the government's actions towards his platform. He was exposing something far more insidious, a covert collaboration between the government and major tech companies to control and influence public discourse from behind the scenes. Musk's words revealed a secretive alliance, one that had been operating under the radar, manipulating public speech without anyone being aware. And as if to back up his claims, Musk had brought receipts. The documents he had presented in court weren't just about his company. They were evidence of something far larger, a systemic effort to shape what people saw, heard, and believed. As the justices began to rise and gather their belongings to leave the chamber, a quiet sense of disbelief lingered in the air. The implications of what Musk had just said were undeniable. This wasn't just a case about compliance with government regulations anymore. No, it had transformed into something much more profound, something that went to the heart of power, free speech, and the boundaries of government authority. When the justices filed out of the courtroom, each of them was undoubtedly carrying a heavy weight in their minds. The case they had just heard was no longer just a legal matter. It was a constitutional crisis in the making. And as they exited, one thing was clear. This was a turning point. Outside the courthouse, the media were already buzzing. Reporters flocked to the steps, microphones in hand, desperate for any piece of breaking news. Within minutes, headlines began to flash across screens. Elon Musk shocks Supreme Court. Barrett and Musk. Unlikely alliance? Free speech or federal control? The questions have been raised, and the public's curiosity was piqued. What had started as a legal dispute over regulatory guidelines had now exploded into a nationwide conversation about the power of the government, the reach of big tech, and the very essence of free speech in the digital age. The stage was set for the story to unfold further, and the entire nation was watching closely to see what would come next. Nobody knows how the court will rule. The justices, after hearing the unprecedented arguments and seeing the evidence laid out before them, will deliberate in silence. The decision is likely to take months, a period of intense reflection as the highest court in the land grapples with the constitutional weight of the case. But one thing is certain. The outcome of this hearing, no matter which way it swings, will be talked about for years to come. Elon Musk walked into that courtroom with no legal team by his side. He didn't have a lawyer, no army of high-priced consultants advising him on the best course of action. There was no carefully scripted defense, no rehearsed lines to deliver. What he had was a deep conviction in his beliefs, a sharp understanding of the law, and a collection of damning documents that painted a picture the government hadn't anticipated. He didn't play by the rules they expected him to follow. Instead, he used their own rules, and even their own words, to turn the tables. The government had expected Musk to falter. They anticipated a crushing defeat, perhaps even a public humiliation. After all, they had brought a case against the world's wealthiest man, a man whose platform was seen as defying the system. They believed he would crumble under the pressure, that his argument would fall apart under the weight of legal precedent. They expected him to lose, and for his defeat to serve as a stark message to anyone who might dare challenge the government's expanding reach. But what they got was something entirely different. What Musk delivered wasn't just a defense of his company or even of free speech on his platform. What he delivered was a powerful reckoning, a moment where the system was forced to confront its own actions. By presenting irrefutable evidence of government overreach, he exposed a covert alliance between the state and big tech that few had recognized and even fewer dared to question. In doing so, he shifted the conversation from a narrow legal debate to something much broader, a discussion about the very foundations of free speech, the balance of power, and whether the government had crossed a line in its pursuit of control over what people say, share, and see. Musk's challenge, one that began with a single defiant no, transformed into a landmark moment in the ongoing struggle between government regulation and individual rights. As the courtroom session ended and the justices filed out, it was clear that the conversation had irrevocably changed. The stakes were now much higher, the ramifications far-reaching. This case wasn't just about a tech company and its regulatory battles. It was about the future of the internet, the future of free speech, and whether the government could or should impose its will on platforms and the individuals who use them. In the end, regardless of the Supreme Court's decision, Musk had already achieved something monumental. He had forced the country to look at the intersection of technology, government, and speech through a new lens. He had proven that sometimes you don't need an army of lawyers or a script. You just need the courage to stand up and speak the truth, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The reckoning wasn't just about the case at hand. It was about challenging a system that had grown too comfortable with its own unchecked power. Musk didn't just take on the government. He sparked a conversation that would continue long after the court's decision, one that could forever alter the way we think about speech, censorship, and the role of both the government and tech giants in shaping public discourse. Whether the court rules in Musk's favor or against him, there's no denying the shift in the air, an undeniable moment of change in the ongoing battle for free speech in the digital age.